The warm, sweet smell of sugar and yeast filled Camilla's small bakery, a cozy world that belonged entirely to her. She was a woman who found joy in simple things, the perfect rise of a loaf of bread, the happy sigh of a customer biting into a warm pastry. But lately her world had become much bigger and much more complicated. Her hand rested on the gentle, firm curve of her stomach, a secret miracle growing within her. She was going to be a mother. The thought was a thrilling, terrifying storm of emotions. She was happy, of course, but a quiet fear whispered in her heart. She would be doing this alone. Feeling a surge of courage, she decided to share her joy. She pulled out her phone, aimed it down at the small bump visible beneath her flour-dusted apron, and snapped a picture. It wasn't just a photo, it was a message to her best friend. It said, "Look, my little bun in the oven is really showing now." With a smile, she typed a quick note and pressed send. At that exact moment, in a city far away, Galvano sat at the head of a long, polished table. This was not a man of sugar and flour, but of silence and power. The room was cold, filled with men in sharp suits who did not speak unless spoken to. He was the boss, the one in charge of a vast, shadowy business. His voice was a low rumble that didn't need to be loud to be obeyed. He was discussing serious things when his private phone, which never rang for casual chats, lit up with a soft glow. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Who would dare interrupt him? He picked up the phone, his dark eyes scanning the screen. And then the world stopped. It was a picture. A woman's slender hand was resting on the soft curve of her stomach, a small, definite swell beneath the fabric. The background was warm and messy, a kitchen counter dusted with what looked like flour. He couldn't see her face, but he could feel the story in that single image. It was intimate. It was vulnerable. It was a promise of life. For years, Galvano had built an empire of fear and respect. He had everything money could buy: cars, houses, power. But the one thing he craved, a family to carry on his name, felt like a distant dream. He had never met a woman he could trust with something so precious. He was a lonely king in a castle of his own making. And this picture, sent from a number he didn't know, felt like a message meant just for him. A sign. This child, this woman, they were his. His decision was instant, absolute. He stood up, cutting off the man speaking mid-sentence. The entire room froze. He didn't look at any of them. His eyes were locked on the photo. "The meeting is over," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Leave." As the room emptied in a hushed, hurried shuffle, his thumbs moved swiftly over his phone's screen. He didn't ask questions. He gave commands. First, to his head of security, "Find this number. I want an address in 5 minutes. Prepare the jet." Then he typed a direct message to the number that had sent the photo. It was not a request. It was a decree. Back in the bakery, Camilla's phone buzzed. Expecting a string of happy emojis from her friend, she looked down. Her blood ran cold. It was a reply from the unknown number. "A car is 10 minutes away. It will take you to my jet. Get on. We need to talk." Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Fear, cold and sharp, shot through her. Who was this? How did he find her so fast? This wasn't a simple wrong number. This was someone with immense power. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, to call the police. But a deeper, more primal instinct for the baby she carried made her pause. This person knew where she was. If she ran, would he just find her? What if he meant to harm her baby? Terror and a wild, reckless curiosity fought inside her. Who was this man who commanded a private jet as easily as she ordered flour? Gathering every ounce of her courage, she locked her bakery door, her hands trembling. She scribbled a quick, vague note for her part-time helper: "Family emergency. Be back soon." It wasn't entirely a lie. The black car arrived exactly on time, sleek and silent as a panther. The driver, a serious man in a dark suit, simply nodded and held the door open for her. The flight was a blur of luxury and fear. She sat in a soft leather seat, staring out the window as her simple life disappeared beneath the clouds. The jet landed on a private runway, and another car whisked her away. Soon, They passed through giant, wrought iron gates and rolled up a long, tree-lined drive. The house that came into view wasn't a house. It was a palace, made of pale stone with more windows than she could count. It was beautiful, but it felt like a gilded cage. The massive front door opened before she could even knock. A stern-faced woman greeted her quietly and led her inside, through grand hallways, to a library. The room was huge, with shelves of books reaching up to the ceiling. A fire crackled in a giant fireplace, but it did little to warm the chill in the air. And then he was there. Galvano stepped out of the shadows, and her breath caught. He was taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders that filled out his dark suit perfectly. His hair was as dark as the night sky, and his eyes were the most intense she had ever seen. They weren't just looking at her, they were seeing straight through her, reading every fear, every thought. He moved with a quiet, powerful grace that made the large room feel suddenly very small. Camilla stood her ground, clutching her small purse like a shield, her chin held high even though her knees felt weak. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze dropping for a single, heart-stopping moment to her stomach before returning to her face. The intensity in his eyes softened, just a fraction. "You are the baker," he stated, his voice a low, velvety rumble that vibrated in the quiet room. It wasn't a question. She simply nodded, unable to find her voice. "You sent the photo." He took one slow, deliberate step closer. The air crackled between them. "That child you carry is my future. My heir." He let the words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. "The world is a dangerous place, especially for someone like you, connected to me now. You will not be going back. From this moment on, you are under my protection. You will stay here." His words were a command, a claim, a sentence. But in his dark, serious eyes, she saw something else. Not a threat, but a fierce, terrifying, and absolute promise. He wasn't just taking her prisoner. He was claiming her and her baby as his own. And as she stood there, trapped in his powerful gaze, she didn't know if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if her greatest adventure was just beginning. The first few days in Galvano's mansion felt like a dream, but one where Camilla was walking on a tightrope. She was a bird in the most beautiful golden cage imaginable. Her room was larger than her entire apartment above the bakery, with a bed so soft she felt she might sink away forever. A walk-in closet was filled with clothes in her exact size, soft, flowing dresses and cozy sweaters. But the doors were heavy, the windows were large, and the silence was deep. Galvano was a ghost in his own home, a powerful presence she felt in the air but rarely saw during the day. Yet his care for her was everywhere. Meals appeared at perfect times, delicious and nutritious. A doctor visited, the kindest she had ever met, and declared both her and the baby in perfect health. One afternoon, Camilla found a brand-new, professional-grade stand mixer and sacks of the finest flour and sugar in one of the many kitchens. The message was clear. He was watching, he was listening, and he was providing. It was overwhelming, but it wasn't cruel. Their truce began at dinner. It was the one time of day he demanded her presence. The first meal was quiet, the clinking of silverware echoing in the grand dining room. He sat at the head of the table, and she sat to his right, a vast expanse of polished wood between them. "Is the food to your liking?" he asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. "It's perfect," Camilla replied, her voice small. "Thank you." A long silence followed. Then she found a sliver of her old courage. "I had a bakery, you know. It was small. The rising dough. I made sourdough and cinnamon rolls." He looked up from his plate, his intense eyes focusing on her. "Why a bakery?" The question surprised her. No one had ever asked it so directly. "Because it makes people happy. There's no problem in the world that can't be made a little better with a warm, buttery croissant." She said it with a small, defiant smile. A strange, almost imperceptible softness touched Galvano's stern mouth. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. "A simple philosophy," he remarked. "It's an honest one," she countered gently. He didn't reply, but he didn't look away. That was the start. Night after night, the conversations grew. She told him about her struggles to start the business, about the old, grumpy regular who only wanted pumpernickel, about the joy of seeing a child's face light up at a cookie. He, in turn, began to share slivers of his own world. He didn't talk about the scary parts of his business, but about his family, a word he used with deep reverence. He spoke of his grandfather, who had come to the country with nothing but a strong back and a stronger will. He spoke of his mother, a fierce woman who taught him that loyalty was the only true currency in life. "A family name is not just a word," he said one evening, his gaze distant. "It is a legacy. It is a story that must be told for generations. It must be protected at all costs." Camilla began to see the man behind the power. The boss was a suit he wore for the world. But the man, the one who valued honor and family above all else, was the one who was starting to captivate her. He wasn't just giving her commands. He was, in his own way, trying to build a foundation. One evening, Galvano came home, and instead of leading her to the dining room, he guided her to a smaller, cozier sitting room where a fire crackled merrily. A low table was set with 2 plates, not of fancy steak, but of the most perfect, cheesy lasagna she had ever seen. "I had it made," he said, watching her reaction. The cook said it was a comfort food. Tears pricked Camilla's eyes. It was a small thing, a simple dish, but it was the first thing he had given her that was for her soul, not just her well-being. It was a gesture that said, "I see you." As the weeks turned into a month, the mansion began to feel less like a cage and more like a sanctuary. They started spending evenings in the library, him reading reports in a large armchair, her reading a novel on the sofa, a soft blanket over her legs. The silence between them was no longer empty, but comfortable, filled with shared presence. Then came the night that changed everything. They were by the fireplace again, the flames dancing and casting long shadows. Camilla was feeling particularly restless, the baby moving more actively than usual. She had her hand pressed to her side, a small smile on her face. "Is everything all right?" Galvano asked, his voice low with concern. "He's just very active tonight," she said softly. "It feels like he's practicing soccer in there." He was silent for a long moment, just watching the firelight play across her face. Then, he did something he had never done before. He slowly stood up and crossed the room. He knelt before her on the thick rug, his posture not one of supplication, but of reverence. His eyes, dark and serious, met hers. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Her breath hitched. This powerful, fearsome man was asking for permission. It was the first true choice he had ever given her. She nodded, her heart thundering in her chest. His hand, so large and usually so sure, trembled slightly as he reached out. He placed his palm gently against the curve of her stomach, over the soft fabric of her dress. The warmth of his touch seeped through to her skin. For a moment, there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and the frantic beating of her own heart. And then it happened. A distinct, solid push from within, a tiny foot or elbow pressing right against the center of his palm. He flinched, a jolt going through his entire body. His eyes flew from her stomach to her face, wide with an emotion she had never seen in them before, pure, unguarded wonder. The hard lines of his face melted away, replaced by a soft, awestruck vulnerability. "He's strong," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. His hand remained, a warm, protective shield over their child. In that moment, the last of Camilla's walls crumbled. She saw not the mafia boss, but a father feeling his child for the very first time. She saw the man who yearned for a family, who saw this baby not as an heir to a business, but as a miracle. A connection, bright and fierce, snapped into place between them, as real and tangible as the fire's heat. Tears welled in her eyes. She brought her own hand up and placed it over his, lacing her fingers with his. His gaze dropped to their joined hands, then returned to her face. The air between them was charged, electric with a feeling that had been growing for weeks. He leaned forward, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She leaned in to meet him. Their first kiss was not a command. It was not a demand. It was a question and an answer, a promise and a surrender. His lips were surprisingly soft against hers, moving with a gentle intensity that made her head spin. It was filled with all the unspoken words, the fear, the hope, the loneliness, and the dawning, terrifying, beautiful realization that this was more than an arrangement. This was the beginning of something real. When they finally parted, breathless, he kept his forehead resting against hers, his eyes closed. His thumb gently stroked the back of her hand. He spoke, his voice a low, raw vow that vibrated through her very soul. "No one will ever hurt you," he whispered, each word a solemn oath. "No one will ever harm our child. You are both under my protection. You are both here." And for the first time, the word, mine, didn't sound like ownership. It sounded like a devotion. It sounded like forever. In the safety of his arms, with the proof of their future kicking gently beneath their hands, she believed him. The peace that had settled over the mansion felt as warm and real as the morning sun streaming through the windows. Camilla no longer saw the high walls as a prison, but as the strong arms of the man who loved her, holding them safe. Their life found a new rhythm, filled with quiet mornings where Galvano would feel the baby move, and soft evenings by the fire where they talked about names and dreams. He had even had a special, sun-drenched room next to the kitchen converted into a baking space for her, filled with every tool she could ever want. It was his way of saying, "Bring your world into mine." She felt cherished, adored, and for the first time, truly safe. But his world was not one that could be locked out forever. It happened on a day he was away, handling business he told her not to worry about. Camilla was in her baking room, the air sweet with the scent of vanilla, when a sudden chill swept through the house. The main power flickered and died, plunging the room into an eerie silence. The gentle hum of the appliances stopped. Before her heart could even finish its frantic leap, Marco, the most trusted of the guards, was at her side, his face a mask of calm urgency. "Come with me, please." "Now," he said, his voice low but firm. But it was too late. A side door, one she never used, creaked open. A man stood there, one of Galvano's own workers, a man she had seen at the edges of the property. His name was Leo, and his eyes, usually respectful, were now cold and greedy. "The boss has something I want," Leo said, his voice slithering through the quiet room. "And I think you're the key to getting it." He took a step closer, and the fear that shot through Camilla was icy and sharp, a feeling she hadn't felt since the day she first arrived. This was the danger he had always spoken of. It was real, and it was staring right at her, threatening the life she carried. Suddenly, a shadow filled the main doorway. Galvano was back. He stood there, not with a roar, but with a silence more terrifying than any shout. His eyes went from Camilla's frightened face to Leo, and in that instant, he was no longer the gentleman who kissed her by the fire. He was the storm. He was the boss. He didn't need a weapon. His presence was enough. He moved with a speed that was shocking, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He grabbed Leo by the collar, his voice dropping to a whisper that was pure ice. "You look at her? You speak to her? You come near what is mine." The fight was over before it began. Other loyal guards swarmed in, but it was Galvano who had already broken Leo's spirit with his words and his fury. As they dragged Leo away, the man turned to her. The storm in his eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. He rushed to her, his hands cupping her face, searching her eyes. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" The words tumbled out, laced with a panic she had never heard in him. Camilla shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "I'm okay. We're okay." She took his hand and placed it on her belly. In that moment she saw it clearly. This wasn't about control. This was about love. A love so fierce and all-consuming that it would tear the world apart to keep her safe. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, his own body trembling with the aftershock of nearly losing everything. "I will burn the world to the ground for you," he whispered, a sacred vow against her skin. "No one will ever frighten you again." The event shook them, but it forged their bond into unbreakable steel. The final wall between them crumbled, replaced by a trust as solid as the earth. Weeks later, on a night when the moon was full and bright, their son decided it was time to meet them. Galvano, who commanded boardrooms and men with guns, was reduced to a bundle of nerves, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, his face pale. But when the first, strong cry of their baby filled the room, his own composure broke. The nurse placed the tiny, swaddled baby in his arms. He looked down at the little face, the perfect nose, the small fingers, and his own breath caught. He looked from his son to Camilla, and the tears he had always held back finally fell, tracing paths down his strong cheeks. He walked to her side and carefully placed their son in her arms. "Look what you've given me," he said, his voice thick with an emotion too big for words. "You gave me a family." In those few words, Camilla heard a lifetime of loneliness finally coming to an end. Later, when the room was quiet and it was just the three of them, he sat on the edge of her bed. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. He didn't just ask her to stay. "I have spent my life building an empire of power and respect," he began, his eyes locked on hers. "But it was empty. It was just a giant, hollow house. Then you arrived. You, with your flower-dusted hands and your brave heart, you filled it with light. You didn't just give me a son. You gave me a home. You gave me a reason to be more than what I was." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He opened it to reveal a ring with a single, brilliant diamond that caught the light, sparkling like their future. "I don't want you just as the mother of my child," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I want you as my partner. I want you as my wife. I want to spend every day of forever proving to you that your mistaken text was the luckiest moment of my life. Marry me." It wasn't a command from a mafia boss. It was a heartfelt plea from a man in love. With tears of joy streaming down her face, Camilla whispered, "Yes." The story doesn't end in the big, scary mansion. It finds its home in the cozy sitting room, where a fire crackles and baby toys are scattered across the rug. The air is filled with the sound of gurgling laughter from their son, and the warm, sweet smell of cookies baking in the oven. Galvano, once so stern and lonely, is on the floor, making silly faces that earn him a delighted giggle. Camilla watches them, her heart so full it feels it might burst. He looks up at her, and his smile is one of pure, unguarded joy. They had found it, an unexpected family, a fierce protection, and a forever kind of love that all started with one single, mistaken text. We hope you were swept away by Camilla and Galvano's story of unexpected love and fierce protection. If this tale of a baker and her mafia boss made your heart race, then you won't want to miss what happens next. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next dramatic romance. We have so many more stories to share with you. We love hearing from you. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what you thought about their whirlwind romance. Were you holding your breath when Leo showed up? Did you cheer when he proposed? Share your thoughts down below.